Hey, so this month was great. I was hired to make a realistic 3D printed snapping turtle. The painting process involved a lot of new things to me, so I'm not going to cover that in this video because I was learning a lot by the seat of my pants. And I just don't feel like I'm in a position to really be advising on that, even though I'm, relatively happy with the way it came out. But what I will talk about in a lot of detail is how I physically built him in the first place. It was from a 3D model that was downloaded online by a website named Savvy Made, which has some really, really cool high-res animal models. And I'm just going to go through the whole process about how I physically built him and how I got the surface of the model to the point where it was ready for paint. So let's get into it. Okay, so the client came to me and said, hey, we found this really cool 3D model online of a snapping turtle. We'd like you to make it, please. It took about 12 and a half spools of filament, so 12 and a half kilograms. And the total print time was 167.5 hours. So if I had been running the printer literally straight without stopping, it would have taken just 30 minutes shy of a week. The file came from a Canadian vendor, Savvy Made. I'm assuming Savvy is the person's name. The site has some really great 3D models. I decided to use PLA wood, the house brand over at 3D Printing Canada. That's what I used. It sands nicely and it's cheaper than some of the other brands. So to start, I had to slice the model up because they wanted it life size, which is, the K2 Max is big, but it's not as big as a full-sized snapping turtle. So I had to start cutting it up into pieces. I ended up cutting it into eighths. I used to use mesh mixer for planer slicing, but I find now it's just as easy in the Anycubic slicer. However, notice this, look at this, 8 hours and 52 minutes if I slice the model in Simplify 3D. If I slice it in Anycubic, it's going to take 16 hours and 15 minutes. I did have one problem. For some reason, when I did the planer cuts, I ended up with this uneven face. So initially I was having trouble printing, but once I got that figured out, then we were off to the races. And like I said, everything was done on the Anycubic Cobra 2 Max. I've got about somewhere around 1,500 hours on it now, and it's been really good. Notice I've got some tape on here. That's because for some reason the exterior supports were falling off. I don't know what was going on, but they weren't staying very well. Initially I actually put some, you'll see I'm pulling the supports out here. You'll see some white stuff there. That's actually acrylic caulking that I put in initially to try and get them to stay. That wasn't working, so I ended up putting the tape on top. And between the two, I guess it was enough to hold the supports on. And then of course, getting them off, you have to be so gentle because if you look at those nails can snap off pretty easily. One problem I had was I was getting some warping, and I usually print in PLA, which doesn't generally warp, so I'm not sure why these pieces were warping. And I'd heard that a raft is a good way to prevent warp. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I try making a raft on one of them? And that was, I told my friend that I had done it, and he said, oh, you're going to regret it because those are really hard to get off, and he wasn't kidding. So here you can see me dealing with the raft and saying bad words. I won't be doing that again, let me assure you. It created a lot of extra work. So here now I've got the Bondo brand body filler. This body compound I had to use now because I had to cut the raft off. Now I didn't have an exterior face. Well, I guess technically I did, but I didn't have a flat wall where I should have. And so now I had to fill that in. Now whenever I work with PLA wood, I like to create a wash out of PVA glue. It soaks in and it acts as a consolidator, so it sort of binds the layers together. And of course, because I had to create that flat surface, it wasn't exactly flat, so then I had to sand it and get it nice and smooth. And then a rough up. So whenever you glue, these are obviously going to be glued together. Whenever you glue anything, you always want to rough it up. You always want to create some tooth, they say. Here I'm blowing off any dust at all, and then using isopropyl alcohol 70% to clean it. It's so important. Preparation is so important for gluing. You really want to make sure that you clean off any finger oils, anything. The reason I'm using 70% IPA here rather than 99 is because the 30% water that's in it will actually absorb into the filament and become the activator for this PU, polyurethane glue. So polyurethane glue, I happen to be using Gorilla brand in this case, but it's not Gorilla brand that I'm concerned about. It's the fact that it's polyurethane glue. That's what I wanted. And you have to, it depends on moisture to activate. And so by using that 70% IPA, which has 30% water in it, that's a great activator for the glue. And the reason I wanted to use polyurethane glue is because it sticks well to wood PLA, and also it foams up, which is good for gaps. PVA sticks well to wood PLA, but it doesn't. But of course, PVA glue, which is wood glue that is not good with gaps. Where you have gaps, PVA glue does not perform well. So that's why I chose polyurethane glue. But of course, like I said, it foams up, and so you get all these oozing, foamy bits at the seams, which is a pain, because then you have to go back and, you see I had that tiny little hand plane, and now I'm sanding, because you've got to get rid of all that excess foam, of course. Now mind you, I'd have to do some sanding anyway, because again, you have to rough things up before you glue them together. This is what a print looks like when it comes off the printer. So you can see all those layer lines, right? It looks like a topo map. So that quantized stepping look obviously is not acceptable. Especially, and that's actually not even painted. So when you paint it, it would even show even more. So what I do is I start with, usually I start with glazing putty. This is Bondo brand, but any spot glazing putty will do. Well, actually, I was going to say not wood putty, but actually some of those are good too. The problem is you've got to be careful that you don't use something that's going to be detrimental to the plastic. But anyway, so I cut this down with acetone and I apply it generously. And the idea here is just to smush it into those layer lines and try to average off the layer lines so that you don't have that stepping anymore. Okay, so again, applying polyurethane glue. The thing that you want to remember with applying any glue is that you want to get it on the entire surface. So notice how, as I'm smearing around here, I'm making a point of not leaving any areas uncovered by glue. And that's because if it doesn't have glue, then it's not adding to the bond, right? And you want the bond on the entire surface. Now, I do leave a little bit of a margin around the edges, only because that stuff is going to ooze out, and it's a pain to deal with. So I don't need any more oozing than is necessary. Another way that I fill in gaps, and I always use this, is UV curing resin, and I mix in some baby powder to give it some body. The reason I use this is because it hardens nicely. The spot in glazing putty does not harden up. It dries, but it doesn't get nice and hard. So if you push on it with your fingernail, you can dig right into it. Whereas this stuff hardens up, so it creates like an enamel shell, which is very important, of course. One of the annoying things about it, though, is you have to clean it off afterward with isopropyl alcohol. After you've cured it, there's always some residue. So I use 99% IPA to wipe it all off. but it creates a really nice hard finish though. But you can see all those layer lines right there. You can see there's tons of sanding to do on all those layer lines. All have to go. So on to filling seams. So again, using the Bondo body filler. I'm trying to push it into the seam, you know, so that it's not just a very thin cover. I forgot to get footage of applying the primer, but I just spray it on. That's the brand I use, Diamond. I usually apply 2 coats. I'll apply 1 coat, let it dry, and then apply a second. And initially when I'm putting primer, I actually apply it, even though I know I've got more sanding to do, I'll still apply the primer because it puts a bit of a sheen, which sort of accentuates any areas that need sanding. After I've done some sanding, I apply the primer, and then it sort of shows me where to focus my effort from that point forward. And then I use those little chisels just to deal with any 3D printing zits that are sticking out all over the place. Here I'm using, I believe it's a 220. The roughest I've ever, I think, used to sand a print is probably 120. 220 I consider still rough for this material. I only ever, if I know that I'm going to be sanding a project, I always use PLA wood, because just plain PLA is terrible for sanding. PLA wood isn't the greatest, but it's certainly better. This is a scratch brush, or scratch brush. I use that to get into all the small contour areas, all those irregular organic areas where I would have a really hard time getting sandpaper in. And then I go over the whole thing with a brass bristle brush. Again, that's just sort of doing a kind of a rough sanding to get everything smooth, to try to feather out any little ridges and what have you that are on the surface. Back to more UV curing resin. Don't forget to wear glasses. If you're using this, you have to wear the protective glasses, and try not to look at it. Try to keep it, even with the glasses, just don't point it toward your face. Again, dealing with the darn glue. It's great glue for this purpose. It adheres very well, but it's a pain. That spillage is annoying. Now here's where the warping created a real problem. I couldn't get everything to line up nicely here. If I lined up the head, then the shell didn't line up properly. And if I lined up the shell properly, the head didn't line up properly. So I had to soften it with heat and then just sort of hold it in place and let it harden up again so this lined up. But even with doing that, the shell was still pretty wonky, so I had to actually use that hand plane and get really aggressive, and then use this aggressive sanding disc. But then it was just more of the same thing, filling with Bondo and applying layers, and then eventually you get to the point where you're just about done. I put a couple of layers of primer on, and then it's just some more hand sanding from then it's on to the painting. So that's going to be all for this one. Hope you guys gleaned something from it. Any suggestions you have, any commentary, whatever, go right ahead in the comments. I read and I respond, so have at her, and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks guys, take care.